Tonight, we are going to be talking about emergency preparedness, which seems like a pretty heavy topic to have in the middle of summer. But I think that we've all kind of understood the reason why we might need that. Even today, it was kind of a beautiful day, but you could still smell smoke everywhere. And certainly after the last, well, quite a while, we've been going through the pandemic, and I think all of us have learned that we need to be prepared. And so today we brought in Grattan Stephenson, who is our go-to guy for all things health and safety. If you're one of our activist members, you know Grattan because he teaches our health and safety courses. He's from Safe Workers of Tomorrow, and so he is our expert on how to get ready. So Grattan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can give us some great tips on what we should be doing now when we're in a little bit of a lull, and hopefully we never ever have to do any of the things that you teach us tonight.
All right, thanks, Aaron. I think a lot of this emergency preparedness stuff is something we should all be doing at some point. I know that something like the pandemic has caught a lot of people kind of off guard for a long while because you weren't really sure what it was, what to expect, or how long it was going to last. And a lot of emergency type situations you have to prepare for are like that. So this is more about preparing for a wide variety of different emergencies, not just a pandemic, right? There's tons of different kinds of emergencies that we need to prepare for, and the best thing we can do is prepare for them ahead of time. Okay, so my name's Grattan. I'm the training director at Safe Workers of Tomorrow. We're a nonprofit organization that's been around since 1997 that primarily does workplace health and safety training, mainly for younger students, younger youth people in high schools. But we also do all kinds of other organizations like employment centers and training centers of all kinds and immigration centers as well. Preparedness itself, rather than emergency planning, emergency preparedness, it just refers to the research-based set of actions that are taken as precautionary measures in the face of potential disasters. When I say disasters, we tend to think of big, huge things like earthquakes and tsunamis and stuff like that, but you can prepare for even very small kinds of things, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go ahead. So these actions can include both physical preparations, such as emergency supply depots or adapting buildings to survive earthquakes. So, we can reinforce things physically. And also training for emergency action, which happens in a lot of workplaces, fire departments, places like that actually have to, from a legal point of view, they have to prepare for emergencies. Preparedness is an important quality in achieving goals and in avoiding and mitigating negative outcomes. The better you can prepare, the less likely that the outcomes are going to be very severe. There's different types of preparedness. There's public health preparedness, which is what we went through for the pandemic. It wasn't the very first time this ever happened at a public health crisis, but it's a big one for people in our lifetime, in our generation. It's a really big one. And it's worldwide. It's not just happening in one country. It's huge. And local emergency preparedness or snow preparedness. I mean, the city of Winnipeg has a big plan for what happens if there's a big snowstorm, right? So that's how they are prepared. Manitoba, province of Manitoba also has one. Most cities too, especially in Canada. But probably the most developed type of preparedness is for disaster preparedness. Right, when something really big happens that affects a wide range of people and maybe in a large geographic area. This includes not only natural disasters, but all kinds of severe damage caused in a relatively short period, including warfare. Not likely that that's ever going to affect us here, but that's where a lot of these ideas come from, right? I think the military was some of the first people to come up with this preparedness idea. Preparedness is a major phase of emergency management. It's particularly valued in areas of competition such as sport and military science. Methods of preparation include research, estimation, planning, resourcing, education, practicing, and rehearsing. We're not going to cover all of this today. It's just way too much. It gets too in depth to it. We're going to cover just some very basic stuff. But I want to look at some historical emergency situations, right? Just so we get an idea of the kind of things that have happened and the kinds of things that could happen that are emergencies. One that's really close to what's going on right now is the Spanish flu of 1918. It ravaged Canada, and to date, it's actually the worst disaster in the country's history. It's also referred to as the 1918 flu pandemic, and it lasted from January of 1918 until December of 1920, so almost 3 years. The disease not only affected the Canadian populace, this H1N1 influenza virus infected over 500 million people worldwide and killed between 3% and 5% of the world's population. So it was a pretty big disaster. Approximately 50,000 fatalities happened in Canada due to the Spanish flu. It even affected things like the NHL hockey. So the hockey playoffs were stopped at, the series was tied and they just stopped it because half the Montreal Canadiens got sick. One of them actually died, and I think the coach actually caught it and died from it years later. But I mean, it made the front page news of all the newspapers in North America. It was wide ranging, and it actually, this one's, Rush for Liquor was a big headlines, but it actually affected, it was probably the first time that people started hoarding things. I'm not sure if hoarding liquor was a good idea, but I think people thought they needed that. And also wearing masks, like in 1918, when the Spanish flu was around. This is a shot of the Canadian Bank of Commerce in Calgary, and everybody's wearing masks. Very similar to what we are doing today, over 100 years later. So again, this is not something that's new, but we learned a lot of how we're reacting now, from past pandemics. Another kind of emergency or disaster was the Halifax explosion in 1917. Seems like the 1917, 1918 were not good years for Canada. So December 6th, two ships collided in the narrow strait between Halifax Harbor and Bedford Basin. The two ships, one of them was actually carrying explosives for the war. The accident caused the cargo to explode. The explosion was so strong that it reached the city of Halifax. It's recorded as the largest man-made explosion in the world to occur, prior to nuclear weapons. Probably 1,800 fatalities and over 9,000 injuries, just from that explosion. It pretty much leveled Halifax. There was a few buildings left standing after the explosion, but not very many. Large pieces of like 1,140-pound anchor was thrown 2.35 miles from the site of the explosion. So you could imagine, maybe sitting in your house and an 1,100-pound piece of ship flies through your house, like you're like more than 2 miles away from the explosion. So the thing about disasters and emergencies is they can happen almost any time. One more recent thing that we probably all remember is the Fort McMurray wildfire. It began on May 1st, 2016. It swept through the community, forcing everybody to evacuate. It was a massive evacuation, biggest one in Alberta's history, with upwards of 88,000 people forced from their homes. 2,400 homes and buildings were destroyed. Another 2,000 residents could not return to their homes because they were unsafe. And it was estimated that it cost $9.9 billion. So it was the most costly disaster in Canadian history. The fire spread across 590,000 hectares or 1.5 million acres before it was declared under control. So it was a huge fire. It not only got close to the town, it went through the town on parts of it. The bad part about the evacuation was the highways were clogged. People, were driving into ditches, but, it's pretty rough terrain out there. And it was really difficult for people to get a safe distance away from where the fire was. And that became like a bigger issue than probably the fire itself. Also, ice storms. This one happened in 2013. It was pretty close to Christmas, but it lasted for 4 days. It went all the way to the East Coast and down into the United States. But the most affected area was in Toronto, and it affected the most people. Lots of ice, definitely a lot of snow. Cold wasn't so bad, but it was mostly what it was doing to the power lines. By December 24th, there was almost 70,000 homes that were still without power. Toronto is one of the hardest hit cities. Excuse me. And some remote communities were without power for several weeks. So in towns, people had to be careful of down power lines. It was a huge cleanup effort. People were without power for long periods of time. Driving was treacherous, and hydro crews and emergency people, it took them a long time to get things right. So many people were left in the middle of winter to kind of survive on their own, with whatever means they could. If they were prepared for it, they probably fared much better than people who weren't prepared for it. In 1997, Manitoba, if anybody's lived here for more than a year, they know that blizzards are pretty common out here in the prairies. In 1997, there was a blizzard in April. It ran from the 5th to the 7th. It closed shopping centers, all surrounding highways. We got nearly 50 centimeters of snow, and it added so much snow to the winter snowfall that it actually raised the Red River by over 1 meter in the spring, resulting in a huge spring flood. Similar events happened in 47, 66, 75. So this is nothing new. So preparing for something like that is something that we know about, but how many people are actually prepared to survive a blizzard in the winter for a week? So the snow actually led to massive amounts of flooding at that time too, which is another reason why we have to prepare for things like this. How often do emergencies happen? Or is it necessary to prepare for them? How frequently? Small emergency situations can happen almost weekly in our lives, right? Large emergencies can happen once every 1 to 5 years, depending on where you live. Severe emergency situations could happen every 5 to 20 years, so there's a wide range in that, again, depending on where you live. Catastrophic emergencies might happen only once in a lifetime, if at all. The smaller the emergency situation, the easier it is to prepare for it. Less likely it is you're going to be unprepared for a small emergency, like having an emergency kit in your house, a medical kit, a first aid kit. You can look after fairly small types of emergencies, but if it's a large emergency, you're going to have to call for professional help. So we talk about the magnitude of an emergency. Things like small emergencies, usually those are like you get a flat tire on Portage Avenue. Hopefully it's not in the winter at night. You lose your wallet or your purse. It's not nice to have it happen, but it's relatively small. You get lost in a town you're visiting. You lose your job. You can recover from that. The internet quits working temporarily. There's a thunderstorm, power outage. So things that tend to be small emergencies that we can usually deal with without too much preparation. In some cases, like a flat tire, do you prepare by calling CAA, or do you prepare by knowing how to change a flat tire, right? So, that's a pretty small type of an emergency. Larger emergencies could be things like blizzards, standing on a remote highway, not in the winter. Your furnace stops working in the winter, or you have no heat in the winter in your house. You fall down some stairs, especially if you're home alone. Extreme heat waves or extreme cold snaps, accidental poisonings. Those are just some examples of larger emergencies. Severe emergencies might be stranded on a remote highway in winter, right? So a big difference between being stranded on a highway in summer or fall versus in winter. A house fire, river or overland flooding, a lost child, or an adult with dementia or Alzheimer's. Hypothermia, if you're out in the cold water or if you're in cold weather. Pandemic, that would be a severe emergency in some cases. Cargo train derailment nearby where you live tend to be a lot more severe than the large ones or the small ones. Chemical plant on fire in your neighborhood. There was one in St. Boniface where I lived not too many years ago, and it could have been a lot worse than it was because of what was actually burning. Catastrophic emergencies would be tornadoes that are headed in your direction. Tornadoes that are happening somewhere else might not affect you, but they're an emergency for whoever's near them. Earthquakes or tsunamis in your town. Wildfires, economic and financial collapse. Your cruise ship is sinking. A dam failure, which could lead to massive flooding. And a prolonged drought, which we're starting to get into now in Manitoba. So depending on the nature of the emergency and what's happening, it can last for much longer periods of time, or it can be much more severe than something that's small. Can we prepare for catastrophic emergencies? Yes, people do it all the time. Do we prepare for small emergencies? Yes, we can do that, and we should be doing that as much as possible. Climate change, that's a new one I put up because it's being looked at as an emergency. It takes a long time for it to affect, but we're actually starting to notice the effects of it now, and we could certainly start calling it an emergency. Define emergency as a situation that poses an immediate risk to health, life, property, or environment, or some things that lead up to having an immediate risk. Most emergencies require urgent intervention to prevent a worsening of the situation. They can be caused by technological hazards, natural disasters or events, political or social instability, and economic collapse. Those can all lead to emergency situations. Technological hazards, these are things that are typically caused by technological failures, or they're happening on a technological level. It's because of the technology involved failing that we now have an emergency or some kind of a hazard. Some of them are much more common than others. Loss of communications can affect a lot of people in a lot of ways, but it doesn't always turn into an emergency. But combined with other things, it can be a very bad situation. Natural hazards, on the other hand, are the ones we think about most frequently: floods and earthquakes, tornadoes or severe windstorms, avalanches. Not so many avalanches here in the prairies, but they're common in mountainous regions. Snow or ice storms, wildfires, severe temperature extremes, hot or cold, and droughts. And pandemics, right? Because it's caused by a virus, it's looked at as a natural hazard. So the possibility of one event triggering others must be considered. An explosion might start a fire and cause a structural failure, while an earthquake might actually initiate many of the technological events listed on the previous slide. So in combination, these things can lead to much more severe emergencies. It's usually a cascade of events that lead to from one thing to another. Cascading effect is just the worsening of that situation. So it might start off small, or it turns into something much larger after other things happen. It's a non-linear process, right? So it doesn't follow a certain sequence of events. Cascade effect is a domino effect. We tend to think that is more linear because it's one hitting another and causing the next. But it's more like a butterfly effect. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but the idea is that a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon basin in Brazil, and that affects weather patterns up here in Winnipeg, right? So it's a small thing that cascades into affecting much larger things. Cascading disasters are events in which cascading effect increases the progression over time and generate unexpected secondary events of strong impact. So that the initial event might not have been too bad, but it causes other things that are even worse. These tend to be at least as serious as the original event. and to contribute significantly to the overall duration of the disaster's effect. The subsequent and unanticipated crises can be made worse by the failure of physical structures, the social functions that depend on them, like you have a bridge that falls because of an earthquake, and now you can't get emergency vehicles over to help wounded or injured people, including critical facilities, a hospital that's affected by an earthquake, or by the inadequacy of disaster mitigation strategies such as evacuation procedures, land use planning, and emergency management strategies. Cascading disasters tend to highlight unresolved vulnerabilities in human society. So once we've seen something that's part of a disaster, we tend to make it stronger and more invulnerable next time. Excuse me. So in COVID-19, the pandemic was declared. That cascaded into people hoarding necessities like masks, toilet paper, food, gasoline, water, etc. Schools and daycares closed, which leads to parents having to stay home, which means businesses were closing. Unemployment increases. Government creates income supports, which increases future tax burden. Bills don't get paid. The debt load increases. The economy suffers. Infection rates increase, healthcare system becomes overwhelmed, psychological impact of severe illness and fatalities on staff, patients, and families. Social isolation can lead to decline in mental health, leads to higher crime rates in some cases, and social instability as a result of that. So these cascading effects are all, from one thing leading into something else that becomes worse over time. And they're non-linear, so they're not always happening in a linear fashion. They're happening pretty much. They could be happening all at the same time. We can actually mitigate the cascade effect by preparing for the emergency. Right, the better we're prepared to react to it or whatever it is, the less likely is it that this cascading effect is going to happen. Where and when do emergencies happen? You can't predict when that's going to happen. They happen anywhere and at any time. It can be at home or while you're on vacation. It can be in urban areas, rural areas, daytime, late at night, weekends, weekdays, winter or summer. And they can happen whether you're prepared or not. They're not going to wait for anything, right? That's the nature of why they're called emergencies. This is what makes preparing for them difficult, but also very necessary. So part of preparing is planning, right? Planning is one component of preparing yourself. If it happens in your community, it may take emergency workers some time to reach you. You should be prepared to take care of yourself and your family for a minimum of 72 hours. That's what's recommended. Your family may not be together when an emergency occurs. Plan how to meet or how to contact one another and discuss what you would do in different situations, right? So it's a discussion that the family needs to have. Cell phone service may not always be available, so do not rely on it to be there. Right? Hopefully there's still landlines around, you can use those. Work with your neighbors to identify people who may need extra help during an emergency. Create an emergency plan. Write yourself a reminder to update it 1 year from now. So if you made your emergency plan today, 1 year from now, you would need to update it. Numbers might change, situations might change, kids might get older, move away, whatever. So annually, you want to review your contact information, practice your emergency evacuation or meeting place plans, change the batteries in your smoke alarm and carbon monoxide detector, restock your emergency kits, which we'll talk about in a bit, change the batteries, the food, the water in your emergency kits once a year. Household plan. Plan to make sure everyone knows emergency exits from your house or your apartment block or condo, whatever. Plan a main exit route and an alternate exit route from each room. If you live in an apartment, plan to use the stairs instead of the elevator. If you're unable to use the stairs, notify emergency personnel ahead of time. They can do something about it. Also identify when an evacuation route from your neighborhood, in case you need to leave in a hurry. and think of more than one option to get out of your neighborhood. The internet might be down, so have a radio that operates on batteries. Identify safe places where everyone should meet if you cannot go home or if you need to evacuate. A safe place near home, outside the immediate neighborhood also. Make copies of your birth and marriage certificates, your passports, your licenses, wills, land deeds, and insurance papers. Include all family members in making documents of those. Take photos of family members in case a lost person's record is created. They want to have a photo of what this person looks like. Have them printed out, not just on your electronic device, because if you can't charge your device or the internet's down or whatever, you want to have those physically printed out. You can keep those documents and photos in a safe place, both inside and outside your home. Maybe keep them at a relative's place who lives in a different part of the city, different province, different country. You might want to put them in a safe deposit box, but if you can't get to the bank to get at your safe deposit box, that won't do you a lot of good. I prefer to give them to friends or family who live out of town. Electronic storage may be unreliable during an emergency. You can store them with various online storage places for access somewhere else, like Google Drive or Apple iCloud. That means you get to a computer somewhere else, you should be able to access it. A USB thumb drive can also be used to store important information. So you can fit a lot of documents on a tiny little USB stick. Put that in your emergency kit, and if you do get to a computer, you can always access all that information. Good reminders to remember your passwords, because some of them you might have not used for a long time. You might need to access stuff, and to do that, you'll need to know your passwords. At your workplace, some special laws about that. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but learn about your emergency evacuation plans in your workplace and what you will need to do. You may want to have some basic supplies at work, such as water and food that won't spoil, just in case you need to stay put in your workplace for a while. Check with your employer about workplace emergency plans, including fire alarms, emergency exits, meeting points, and designated safety personnel or floor wardens. And do they have a plan for all emergency types, right? Not just fires or storms or power outages. What about armed intruders and collapses of structures and stuff like that? So the Manitoba Workplace Safety and Health Act requires employers to address emergency planning. It's part of every workplace's health and safety program, so you should have one at work. Children, special consideration if you have children. Ask for your children's school or daycare about what their emergency policy is. Find out how they will contact families during emergencies. Find out what type of authorization the school or daycare requires to release your children to a designated person if you can't pick them up. If you can't make it there to pick them up and you want someone else to do it, there's special protocols that have to be followed. Make sure the school or the daycare has updated contact information for parents, caregivers, and designated persons. Pets, if you have pets, other than maybe goldfishes, like furry pets, in case of an evacuation, remember that pets are not allowed in some public shelters or hotels, right? So you might have to find a hotel that will take them. If there's an evacuation, prepare to take your pet with you, or to a home or of a relative or a friend, or to take steps to identify pet-friendly hotels or pet boarding facilities in your area, and possibly further away from your home, because you might not always be able to take your pet into a shelter. Include pet food and water in preparing an emergency kit for storage. Special health needs. Establish a personal support network of friends, relatives, and healthcare providers, coworkers, neighbors who understand your special needs. Write down details about accommodation needs, insurance information, allergies, medical conditions, emergency contacts, medications that you might be on, family medical history, recent vaccinations, health screenings, and surgeries. Keep a copy of this information in your emergency kit. Give a copy of it to your personal support network, And talk to your doctor about preparing a grab and go bag if possible with a 2-week supply of medication and medical supplies, including prescriptions and medical documents. Remember that pharmacies may be closed for some time even after the emergency is over. Safe home preparing. Make sure you have a working carbon monoxide detector, a smoke alarm and fire extinguisher in your home, a well-stocked first aid kit that is portable. Don't nail it to a wall. If you have an apartment or if you are staying in a hotel, know where the fire alarms are, and at least 2 emergency exits are located. Make sure you have a fire extinguisher on every level of your home, including one in your kitchen. Everyone in your home should know where to find the fire extinguishers. All capable adults and older children should know how to use it. See instructions regarding the lifetime of your fire extinguisher and check with your local fire department for more information on it. Can't stress that enough, right? Anybody who's able to use a fire extinguisher should be trained on how to use it. If you have like a teenage kid staying home alone, they should definitely know how to operate it. Older children and adults should know how to turn off your home water system, your home water supply, the electricity and the gas. Make large, easy to see signs for water and gas shutoffs, as well as for electrical panels. Teach children how and when to dial 911, as well as how to call the designated out-of-town contacts. Arrange for each family member to call, email, or text the same out-of-town contact person in case of an emergency. Choose an out-of-town contact who lives far enough away that he or she is unlikely to be affected by the same event. If you're new to Canada or have recently moved to a new area, make arrangements through friends, cultural associations, or community organizations. Limit phone calls to urgent messages only. Keep calls short and free up the lines for others. And if you're using a cell device, it won't drain your battery because you might not be able to charge it. We all know about calling 911 to report a crime or to save a life. For non-emergency calls, there's a separate phone number listed in your phone book. When notifying emergency services of your location, provide the exact street or civic address and the nearest intersection. For the gas and water valves, keep shutoff instructions close by and read them carefully. During an emergency, right, when there's actually an emergency started or ongoing, follow your emergency plan. Get your emergency kit ready, get it out. Make sure you are safe before you assist other people. Listen to the radio or the television for more information from authorities. Local officials may advise you to stay where you are. Follow their instructions. Stay put until all is safe or until you are ordered to evacuate. If there is an evacuation, they'll tell you, right? The authorities will tell you that you need to evacuate. This evacuation could be on foot, it could be by vehicle, it could be by boat, or it could be by air. So if they think that you need to evacuate, they'll usually tell you. If you're ordered to evacuate, take your emergency kit, take your wallet, personal ID for each family member, copies of essential family documents, bring a cell phone and a spare battery or charger with you if you have one. Use travel routes specified by local authorities, right? You don't want to be breaking the rules at that time. Listen and whatever the instructions are, follow them as best you can. If you have time, call or email your out-of-town contact. Tell them where you are, where you're going, and when you expect to arrive. And once you're safe, let them know, right? So they can pass that information on. If possible, leave a note telling others when you left and where you are. Shut off water and electricity if officials tell you to do so. Leave your natural gas service on unless they tell you to turn it off. It could take a long time to get your gas turned back on. It could take weeks, for them to respond to turn it back on, once the emergency is over. So only turn your gas off if they tell you to. Take your pets with you, lock your house, and follow the authorities' instructions. If you do go to an evacuation center, register your personal information with the registration desk. Do not return home until authorities advise that it's safe to do so. Emergency kits. In an emergency, you will need some basic supplies. You may need to get by without power or tap water. You should be self-sufficient for a minimum of 72 hours. You may make you may have some items already, like extra food and water in your house, a battery operator, a crank flashlight. The key is to make sure that these are organized and easy to find, and you would be able to find your flashlight, in the dark. Would you be able to? I don't know. I can find mine, but we should all be able to find one. Make sure your kit is easy to carry and everyone in the household knows where it is. Keep it in a backpack, a duffel bag, or a suitcase on wheels. Make it easy accessible, like a front hall closet or something. If you have a lot of people in your household, make everyone have their own bag. Maybe split it up into multiple bags because there's going to be a lot of stuff and everybody can carry something. 72-hour minimum. So we need bare essentials like air, water, shelter, and food. And remember the rule of threes, right? Most humans can survive 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in bad conditions, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. When you're gathering your supplies, 72 hours is the minimum amount to have supplies available for, if there's an evacuation or not. More stuff is better because you never know how long the emergency will last. If there's no evacuation, you can easily store these supplies to last 72 hours in your home. Things like food, water, vitamins, pet supplies, and medicine if they're needed. The suggested minimum amount of time to plan an emergency for is 72 hours or 3 days, but a much better plan is to have 2 weeks worth of these on hand in your home. If you need to evacuate, be prepared to bring 72 hours worth of supplies with you. Surviving for 72 hours is better than nothing, but most modern experts believe that you should be prepared for at least 2 weeks in order to handle the majority of likely events. So the Red Cross has updated it to 3-day supplies for evacuation and 2-week supply for at home. Emergency systems can be overwhelmed quickly. So you need to have more stuff with you. Recent events like the Haiti earthquake, Japanese tsunami, etc., and California wildfires are all examples of localized disasters where people were displaced or without basic services for weeks, not days. So don't rely on just 72 hours of stuff, right? Plan to be self-sufficient for a little bit longer of a period of time. Better to plan and gather the supplies before the emergency happens. Many items may be hard to find once an emergency is declared. In a pandemic, for example, as people who supply and distribute items become ill, food and other staples will become scarcer as time goes by, both locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally. Water, you should have at least 2 liters of water per person per day, including small bottles that can be carried easily in case of an evacuation order. Food that won't spoil, such as canned food, energy bars, and dried food. Replace food and water once a year. A manual can opener, because you might not have power for an electrical one. Lights, you need headlamps, lanterns, a crank or battery powered flashlight. A crank or battery powered radio with extra batteries, or an NOAA weather radio. They're cheap to buy and they last on batteries for almost forever. A first aid kit, insect repellent, don't forget that, especially in Manitoba in summer. Sunscreen, extra keys for your car or your house, some cash in smaller bills because you might not be having access to the internet for using your debit card or your credit card. A copy of your emergency plan and contact info, and applicable things like prescription medications, infant formula, stuff for pets, right? If you're having your pets with you. Additional things: 2 additional liters of water per person for cooking and cleaning, candles and matches or a lighter. Change of clothing and footwear for each household member, sleeping bag or warm blanket, toiletries, hand sanitizers, paper and pencil, small fuel-operated stove and fuel if you have it, solar battery or device recharger, right? It runs on solar energy. eating utensils, garbage bags, toilet paper, water purifying tablets or water filtration devices, basic tools that you might have access to already, whistle in case you need to attract attention, duct tape for taping of windows, doors, and air vents, books and games, play cards, or puzzles or other activities for children or for yourself if you get bored, and extra insect repellent and sunscreen. If you think your house water is contaminated, don't drink it without purifying it somehow, either by boiling it, using purification tablets or filtration. Keep some cash on hand because banking machines might be down. Pre-made kits are available from the Red Cross. The Salvation Army also has some. Various other kits are from different suppliers all over the internet. Pre-made kits are a good place to start, but the best kits are the ones that you customize and make yourself. Pre-made kits are better than nothing, but that's about all. If you look at the kits that are available from the Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross, they're very basic. They're not that great. The quality of the items are not that high. Even their disaster preparedness kit, again, it's better than nothing, but for the price of it, you can build something much better on your own. But use it as a basic place to start. Emergency kits for vehicles. It's very similar to what you need to have in your home, but it should be tailored, to where you're traveling and what part of the country you're going to be in. Probably not as crucial because you're not likely going to be in your vehicle for a very long time. Additional vehicle items, antifreeze, windshield washer fluid, fire extinguisher, road maps, tow rope, jumper cables. So again, depending on where you are and where you're traveling, you might need other stuff. In Manitoba in winter, always carry extra heavy duty winter clothes in your vehicle. If you're making your own kit, strive to use the best quality items you can afford. Replace lower quality items with higher quality ones over time. If you're on a budget, it's better to buy fewer high quality things than cheap stuff that will fail when you need them the most. Your hot water tank typically holds over 200 liters of water. So even if it's not working, you can still drain and drink that water, right? Don't forget about that. It's always a good idea to take the basic first aid course, right? This is especially helpful in emergency situations where you may be isolated or when paramedics or hospital people are dealing with more serious injuries. I always recommend that. A couple last thoughts. Do not just buy some supplies and gear and throw it into a closet and make that a preparation. You're not really prepared unless you practice with your supplies and your plan. Prepare, practice, and plan before an emergency happens. If you're not preparing and you are not preparing for a zombie apocalypse, right? Stay realistic and practical. Avoid the zombie and the Rambo fantasies and focus on things that matter most. And remember that simpler is better when it comes to preparing for emergencies. Do not fall victim to the doomsday prepper mentality. Life is good, and you should strive to enjoy it, right? So, don't get all wound up on this really depressing stuff. All right, that's it. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Grattan. And I'm really glad you included the part about stop worrying about zombies, because I have to say, the more that we did this, the more I was thinking about The Walking Dead, and I felt like my anxiety rising a bit. But I guess the best way to deal with that is to be prepared, and then you feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't want anybody to go out and prepare for a zombie apocalypse because the odds of that happening are really, really low.
We're not worried about that one. But there are some things we should probably be thinking about. And I've got a lot of questions and we have not tons of time, but I'm going to try to get through a few of them. So we had somebody ask, what should you be packing and preparing for a family vacation?
Oh, I guess it depends on where you're going. I don't remember off the top of my head. I actually have a vacation list. It's a Microsoft Word file. I have a whole bunch of stuff on there. There's lots of really good ones you can look up on the internet. Um, but I think the more traveling you do, the better you get at planning it and what you're packing. Certainly medications are something you can plan to take with you that often people forget. Sunscreen. A lot of countries you go to on vacation might not, you might not be able to get those items in those countries. And if you have a list, um, update it, right? Because you're going to go away on vacation, you're going to forget something. When you get back, just add that item to your list. I have one for camping, right? So that's different. If I have one when I go on vacation, like to Mexico or something.
You mentioned that there are places to find some of those lists. Where would you recommend people look for that?
I would just Google search it, honestly. There's lots of really great ones out there that people have made. I think the one that I started with, I don't even remember where I got it from. It might have been on like the GQ website or something years ago. Um, Friends of mine have had their own, and we've combined lists and we've compared notes. And it's not something you really spend a lot of thought on, but it is something that you should update from time to time for sure. Especially you go on a vacation last year and you didn't have kids, and then 2 years later you're on vacation and you have a kid. Well, that whole list is going to change completely. And it's the same for your emergency preparation kit or things you do for home emergencies. That changes depending on what changes in your life.
What about, and you sort of touched on a little bit, but what if you're going to a country that doesn't have like the same amount of government structure as we would have in Canada? What are some of the, I would not go to those countries without this in my backpack?
um, wow, that's a good question. I think for sure some kind of medications, but again, you have to be careful with that stuff because some countries don't allow some kinds of medications or drugs. Um, Identification, always make sure you have it with you. I take a photo of all my documents on my phone in case somebody steals my backpack or breaks into my room and steals my passport. At least I have my phone locked in a safe or something or with me, and I have those documents on there. Um, I think the one thing I hardly ever will travel without is lotion, like hand lotion, body lotion, simply because if you're walking for long periods of time, there's areas that are going to get really badly chafed, and lotion always helps. And keep a
I mean,
couple
that's not
spare
even a
batteries.
it's just about being comfortable, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it really depends on where you're going. I think any place that you would go to that is going to have a lot more risk associated with being there, there's going to have to be a lot more planning on what you need to take.
Right.
And check with professional travel companies and stuff like that. They have really good lists of stuff. And I remember reading some of those years ago, and I was actually shocked at some of the things they recommend taking. And also, the government of Canada has a do not travel list. So you can go to the government of Canada, you can search for countries that they recommend you just absolutely do not go to. And there's other countries, they make list of, just be advised if you go do this.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. If you could go back, this was a question from somebody watching. If you could go back again to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, is there anything you would do differently?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I don't think so. I mean, I'd say the pandemic, it's pretty far reaching in a lot of ways, but I think Canada's a pretty fortunate country to be living in for something like this because we have a lot of things that are a lot of support systems that are here for us. And even though that it was getting kind of scary for a while with not having enough toilet paper or gasoline was being bought like crazy for a little while, but I, I don't know. I think I'd probably spend more time talking to my friends and family about what to do or what to expect. Just educating people on how you can prepare for this so you don't panic,
Yeah.
right? So you don't get into this hoarding situation.
It was hard not to get caught up in that at the early points. And I I did not go out and buy mountains of toilet paper, but there was a moment that I thought, oh, maybe I should be doing these things. Maybe I'm wrong to do it. So I think you're right that sometimes it's just sort of to talk ourselves down. I have another question about, we often think of the big emergencies. What are some of the little things that people are missing that are sort of the more common everyday something people maybe don't think of on their own?
Um, Traffic jams, like just this morning, Provence Boulevard was closed down for 2 blocks. If you had to get somewhere in a hurry, you wouldn't be able to do it where I live. Um, can you plan for something like that? That's hard to do, right? Do you have alternate routes of getting to where you need to go? So it's sometimes it goes beyond being just a mere annoyance, right? Sometimes it becomes a life-threatening situation. Like if you have a traffic, I mean, my street right, nearby here was a parking lot because nobody could drive on Provence. What if you had a fire, or what if you had an emergency and an ambulance had to get here? I'm sure they have ways of doing that. And other things that I find they're not really huge emergencies, but it's like losing your car keys, or misplacing your wallet, or losing it or something like that. No, how do you plan for that? Having backup copies of it, and knowing the procedure to get new credit cards and new driver's license. Having gone through that once, I hope I never have to go through it again. Um, and car keys, I mean, they have these, Apple's got this new thing. It's like a little tag. You hang it on your car keys, you put it on your backpack, in your backpack, wherever, and you can pull out your phone or your computer and you can track this stuff down. So things that, probably used to be a real sort of bigger emergency are now becoming less of an emergency. Um, and I think small emergencies, I don't really spend too much time worrying about them. I think most people are capable of figuring out how to deal with smaller emergencies. Certainly, anybody who's been a parent has stressed many, many, many hours about what to do if this happens. And laying awake at night and imagining these things, that's not good either, right?
No.
Just
No, but
be
I
as
was thinking
prepared
the
as you
other
can
day,
be.
I spent 15 minutes looking for my car keys. If it was one of those situations that we've seen in Canada of, and luckily in Winnipeg, we haven't seen that, but in some parts of Canada, when there's a fire evacuation, people don't have a lot of time in those sort of situations. So that 15 minutes I spent looking for keys would have been crucial. So it's sort of those kind of things we have to think about. And you mentioned having a spare set of keys and maybe making sure that that one's always in the place that everybody knows where it is.
Right, and that's the whole thing about having a kit that's portable, right? If there's an evacuation, all you have to do is grab a bag or two, throw it in your vehicle, and you're gone. While other people are furiously trying to gather stuff. Meantime, you've already left the house, you're on the highway, you're not caught up in the big traffic jam with everybody else, right? You're going wherever you got to go.
And there is always that moment, I'm sure, where people think, do I grab the photo albums? Do I grab the favorite stuffed toy? And people need to be focused on getting themselves and their family safe and not worrying so much about their possessions.
Absolutely. I mean, what good is a photo album going to do you if there's no one around to show it to?
Yeah.
I think of nowadays with so many photos being backed up online or in digital form, we're less likely to miss out on that stuff than we were in the past. Um, but there's some really good articles online and stories about people that have lost everything, and how they've bounced back and what they now think is important in their life versus what they used to think was important.
Yeah, let's hope we don't have to find that out. It's interesting. We all have lived through a worldwide emergency. And before the pandemic, I would have always thought of it as, sirens and chaos and everybody running around. And this was a very almost quiet because we were all tucked in our houses. And if you looked
Yeah,
outside, it was eerily quiet at some points during the pandemic.
it was a very civil emergency, right? Because of its nature. Could it have been a lot worse? Absolutely, right? Because of all the social structures we have, and the timely vaccination that happened, things didn't escalate completely out of control. But there are other places in the world where you know, it was definitely a catastrophic event for some communities in the world.
And not like, yeah, I mean, not to downplay what happened here. Of course, we did have some very tragic results, and
Yep.
our folks working in healthcare are probably pretty exhausted right now. But yeah, it seemed a lot more civilized than I would have imagined it to be. Then I'm imagining the zombie apocalypse that I'm not going to think about, because you have wisely told us just be prepared or not worry about those things.
Yeah, that's
Thank you so much for being with us. And I know that, you know, we really just touched on just the small bit of what you would need to know in order to get prepared. But it is a good reminder that we should do that. And, you know, we're in the middle of summer and people maybe are not thinking about it, but it is always a good time to be prepared. I also just wanted to mention, and again, thank you, Grattan. For those of you who are UFCW members, if you're an activist, you'll know Grattan because he teaches our health and safety classes and you see him around the building. For those of you watching who are not UFCW members, if you're thinking it sounds like an interesting thing and you'd like to know more about being a union member, what you're looking at right now is our website, UFCW 832.com. If you go to the very first page and scroll down, you can see right here it says join UFCW, and you can learn about the advantages of being in our union and how you could get that for your workplace. So Grattan, with that, I am going to calmly think about what I need to be prepared and not panic in any way.
excellent.
And go to enjoy the rest of the summer. So thank you so much for being with us, Grattan, and thank you all of you out there for watching as well. Have a good, safe summer, and we will see you in August. Oh my goodness, our next one is not till the end of August, but we'll see you then. Thank you all for joining us.
Bye.
Good night.